Thank you, Ray, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for attending this presentation, and for those of you tuning online, thank you very much for being here. I have the privilege to give you back-to-back presentations today, one on mid-review cycle meetings, and the second one will be on the post-complete response letter meetings. Now, I have some good news and bad news. I always like to start off with the bad news first. So the bad news is you get to hear me talk for about an hour today, back-to-back. The good news is I don't intend to use a whole allotted time, especially if there aren't that many questions at the end, so to give you guys all some extra time for a break afterwards. So with that, let's get started. So here's my outline of what I'm going to talk about first in the mid-review cycle meetings. So the first thing I'll cover is the goals. Secondly, what does this mean to industry, and what does this mean to the FDA? The overall impact, what the responsibilities are for industry, as well as FDA, and what can industry do to assist in making these meetings more successful. So what is new? So with GDF 2, we established a pre-ANDA program for complex generic drug products, and you've heard some talks right before my presentation on the product development, as well as the pre-submission meetings. So when applicants are granted these meetings, they also have an opportunity to have a mid-review cycle meeting, which I'll refer to as MRCM for the rest of my talk today. And what the goals of these MRCM meetings are is to clarify regulatory expectations in early development, to assist applicants with developing more complete submissions, and to lead to a more efficient and effective review process. So as we hold these meetings, the hope is that with having that dialogue at these meetings, that FDA will gain a better understanding of some of the questions and comments that we have asked for industry, and as well industry can have a dialogue with us and understand what we are looking for, so that when the response is submitted, we would be able to quickly review this, and also this will lead to less of a number of review cycles, and hopefully, I think the ultimate goal is that we all want first cycle approvals, which is a win for both of us. So I also want to point out as well that MRCMs generally take place 30 days after the mid-review point, or usually when the last DRL, which is also known as the discipline response letter, or the IR, or the information request is submitted. It's also, the other thing I want to also mention as well is that this is usually only held for the first review cycle of the application. So this slide here is, so I can just emphasize once again that these mid-review cycle meetings are generally held for complex generic products only. And as I mentioned, they must have had either a pre-submission meeting or a product development meeting. So MRCMs are mentioned in the GDF 2 commitment letter, and this slide is just to point out what section it's stated on, and I'll just kind of break this down in the next few slides of what this really means. So what I wanted to point out here is that unlike most of the other types of meetings that are generally held, including the post-complete response letter meetings, which I'll be talking about next, FDA will be initiating most of the process here. And that's the reason why all the circles here are kind of pointing towards the applicant. So what this means is that FDA will schedule the telephone conference. FDA will be sending the agenda, as well as providing the review status and asking the questions. FDA has also not specified specific performance review goals regarding the mid-review cycles meetings, so that applicants are not obligated if they feel that the comments and questions they received previously are adequate, and they have the option to not hold this meeting. So what is the impact? And as I mentioned before, these meetings are to lead to a more efficient and effective review process, reduce the number of cycles, and decrease the time from an ANDA acceptance to an approval. So who is responsible? And this diagram kind of points to the shared responsibility between the applicant, the regulatory project managers, who are the point of contact for the ANDAs, the regulatory business process managers, or the RBPMs, and these are the project managers in the Office of Product Quality, the discipline project managers who are within Office of Generic Drugs, and all the associated review teams. So I'll kind of go through what will we do. So I'll start off with the RPM, or the Regulatory Project Manager. So first, they'll schedule the MRCM meetings, as well as also the pre-internal MRCM meetings that we hold within the agency to develop the agenda. Then they'll send the meeting notifications and provide the date and time for the MRCM to be held with the applicant. They'll reserve the phone lines and provide the teleconference number for you to dial into. They'll draft and send the agenda. And at this point, I would recommend that if there's any questions or comments about the agenda, that the applicant should reach out to the RPM to discuss. They'll then facilitate the actual MRCM meeting, and then they'll send and they'll draft and facilitate and distribute the meeting minutes. Now, the meeting minutes that the RPM sends are the official FDA meeting minutes, which is the official record. So if there's any questions about the meeting minutes, please reach out to the RPM as well, so that we're all on the same page. I also want to mention that these meeting minutes are generally sent about 30 minutes after the meeting is held. So what will the DPMs, or the Discipline Project Managers, or RBPMs, do in the MRCM process? First, they'll notify the disciplines of the pre-meetings and the MRCM meetings. Second, they'll attend the internal pre-meetings. Third, they'll coordinate the reviewer input. Fourth, they'll attend the MRCMs, and then they'll assist with drafting the meeting minutes. Finally, for the review team, what they will do is they'll attend the internal pre-meetings, they'll provide the applicable agenda items, they'll attend the MRCM. Fourth, they'll lead applicable scientific discussion, and they'll provide comments and edits to the MRCM minutes. So what can industry do to assist in helping make these meetings more successful? First, review the agenda items. As I mentioned before, if there's any questions or comments about the agenda items, please reach out to the RPM and make sure that you understand it. Because during the actual MRCM meetings, we will not be taking questions or be straying away from the agenda items. And this is not the opportunity at the MRCM meeting to start asking questions that are outside of the agenda. Secondly, prepare the responses. Be ready to talk about what's on the agenda. And that also involves, if you see the agenda and there's specific regulatory questions that we have, or specific scientific questions that are up for discussion, make sure the relevant people in your group is also attending the MRCM meeting so we can have a productive dialogue. Third, attend the meetings. Fourth, discuss the responses. And finally, as I mentioned before, follow the agenda. So I want to leave you with some tips. So first, clearly identify the eligibility on the cover letter. So if you've had a product development meeting and a pre-submission meeting, and you are a complex drug product, please make it clear on your cover letter that you are eligible for an MRCM meeting. This helps out the RPM to quickly triage and identify this so that we can contact you to set up an MRCM. If after 14 days, after your ANDA has been accepted for filing, if you haven't heard back from your RPM about an MRCM meeting, please reach out to your RPM because there might have been some kind of issues, or we might have missed it. But if you want that MRCM meeting, that's a time for you to kind of reach out and find out what's going on. It's best to take the first date suggested, as it's scheduled close to the mid-cycle date, and it's not as productive to push the meeting back. So after the DRLs or IRs are issued, we usually try to time the MRCM so it's close to that date, so that all of the review team is aware of what was sent out. But if you can't take that first date, feel free to ask. But the longer it's pushed out, there's other priorities that the reviewers have, as well as the comments and questions that are posed initially. It may not be as productive a dialogue during the actual meeting. Have the appropriate people attend the meeting. As I already said, make sure the right people are in the room and can talk about the comments or questions that we have on the agenda. And then finally, this is not an opportunity for pre-review. So please don't ask questions or bring up issues at this meeting that's not already submitted in the ANDA application, as well as, or it's not on the agenda. We're not going to take new data or new information and discuss that during this meeting. And one other thing I wanted to leave you guys with is don't summarize the application history or why it's of public health importance for your ANDA, because most of this is already submitted with your application, and we don't need, and this is usually a 30-minute meeting, and we don't need to spend extra time kind of talking about those points, which we are already aware of if you have submitted that with your application. So in summary, we learned the goals of the MRCM, what this means to us and to you, what our responsibilities are, and what you can do, and also some of the tips I want to leave you with. So the real takeaway today I want you to get from this is that the MRCM is still a pretty brand new process. And as mentioned, we haven't had that many in-house so far. So if you have any questions during, if you're an applicant that has an MRCM with us or you plan to submit one, please reach out to the regulatory project manager who's assigned to the respective ANDA, and they would be happy to walk you through it and answer any questions that you may have. Okay, so I think I'm making good time right now, and that wraps up the first type of meeting that I wanted to cover. So I'll go straight ahead and go right into the second type of meeting, which I think more of you should be familiar with, and these are the post-complete response letter meeting requests, or I'll say CRL MR for short the rest of today. So before I begin my talk on CRL MR, I wanted to relate this to a favorite board game of mine, which I hope everyone has heard of or at least played, which is the game of Monopoly. So the CRL MR is like picking up that get-out-of-free-jail card in Monopoly. Nobody likes to land on the go to jail, right? But if you land on there, I guess what I think of is it's kind of like when you as an applicant are expecting that approval, and instead by that goal date you get that dreaded complete response letter, right? Nobody wants to get that when you're thinking, I'm going to get approval. So that the CRL MR, to me, if you have a successful CRL MR, it allows you that second chance in the game. So hopefully that will lead to an issue response that should lead to an approval. And just like the game of Monopoly, if you get that, if you can use that get-out-of-free-jail card and roll the dice again, hopefully you can build that house or hotel on Boardwalk if you're that first generic blockbuster drug trying to get that approval. Or Baltic Avenue if you're like that 200th generic ibuprofen. So I'll start with the outline. So what's new and changed? What will the applicants do and what will the agencies do during the CRL MRs? What should industry expect and do? The top reasons that meetings are denied, and some of the tips that I want to leave you with to kind of make sure that these meetings are more successful. So again, I put a slide up here for the reference of where the complete response letter meetings are discussed in the commitment letter. And I'll go through and kind of break this down. But I want to highlight that in the GDF 2 commitment letter, it also adds timeframes within which FDA will provide a scheduled date and will conduct these post-CRL meetings. So I recommend that you all read through this guidance, the post-complete response letter meetings between FDA and ANDA applicants under GDUFA. And if you've downloaded the PDF, if you click on that in that area, it should lead you directly to the guidance. So everything I'm going to talk about today is really covered in this guidance. So, if you miss something, if you are zoning out or you miss part of my talk, just go to this guidance and it should cover pretty much what I'm going to talk about today. And it does a really good job of kind of breaking down all of the basics, including the GDF 2 goal dates, how to assess your CRL MR, the specific criteria that we have for granting and denying these meetings. What does a complete meeting package look like? Rescheduling and canceling the CRL MRs, the procedures for conducting a meeting via teleconference, as well as the documentation of the meetings. So I'll start with the goal dates. So as I mentioned, under GDF 2, FDA agreed to certain goals for scheduling and conducting these meetings. So FDA committed to providing a scheduled date for 90% of the CRL MRs within 10 calendar days of the meeting request receipt. FDA has also committed to conducting 90% of the CRL MRs on an FDA proposed date within 30 calendar days of the meeting request receipt. So that's one change from GDF 1, where GDF 1, it used to be US business days, but now we've changed it to calendar days. So for example, if the applicant submits a CRL MR on January 1st, then by January 11th, which is day 10, they need to submit that CRL MR, and they would be eligible for the goal date, for as well as scheduling it, as well as also being eligible for whether it's granted or denied, and getting that communication. So the CRL submitted after 10 calendar days will be granted if meeting request is otherwise complete, but ineligible for goal dates. So what that means is we're not going to deny your meeting if you don't submit it within 10 calendar days, but the goal dates and the metrics that we're capturing will not apply for these. So what will the applicants do? Applicants will submit the complete meeting request package within 10 calendar days of CRL issuance. So what a complete package looks like is they should contain all of these criteria. So they should list the proposed clarifying questions grouped by discipline. If you have specific labeling questions, microbiology questions, make it clear and have subheadings of labeling and what your specific questions are that are clarifying, as well as microbiology and all of the questions associated with that you want addressed. The list of individuals from applicants' organization, that should include their titles, the affiliations, and positions. The requested format of the meeting. So if you're requesting a teleconference, include that proposed agenda outlining how the 30 minutes should be apportioned to each question. If you have 10 questions that you want to ask, just know that you have 30 minutes for this meeting, and we're very strict in terms of adhering to that 30-minute time frame. So I would recommend that you break it down into how many minutes you want for each question. If after 30 minutes we've only gone through 5 of your questions, that's all the time you have. So I would recommend that you prioritize the questions you have and make sure that you allot enough time for each question that you want addressed. Also list the specific review disciplines you want present at this meeting, so that we can have a productive and meaningful conversation in trying to help you to clarify the questions that you have at this meeting. So what will the agency do? And I broke it down into 2 buckets. So the first bucket would be the regulatory project manager, who's the main point of contact. I want to caveat that with, if it's a quality-only prior approval supplement, or a labeling-only prior approval supplement, the point of contact would be either the project manager for quality, or the RBPM, or the labeling project manager. And what their responsibilities will be is they'll identify and triage and assign the meeting requests. They'll provide the preliminary grant and denied decisions. They'll communicate with the applicants and issue that meeting request correspondence. They'll schedule and facilitate the teleconference and draft the meeting minutes and track the goal dates. On the review team side, this consists of the discipline project managers, the RBPMs, the reviewers, the team leaders, and the division directors for the discipline team. And what they will do is they'll provide that final grant or deny decision. They'll provide the responses to the clarifying question. They'll attend the conference, and they'll provide edits and concurrence to the meeting minutes. So what should industry expect? Predictable review times. With GDF 2 and with the goal dates associated with these meetings, you should be able to predict that if you submit that meeting request within the 10 days of the complete response, that you should receive a response within 10 days, as well as have a meeting scheduled within 30 days in the majority of the cases. You should receive more timely communications, and we have more of a strict adherence to the criteria for granting and denying the meeting requests. So what can industry do to assist in making these meetings more successful? Submission of a complete meeting package. So as I mentioned before, and it's also in the guidance, this includes listing all of the attendees and the titles and the positions of the attendees, the proposed agenda with the time allotment for each of the questions and limiting it within 30 minutes. I also want to point out that we won't be accepting questions on a rolling basis. So if there's questions after the meeting request is submitted, we will not be entertaining those questions afterwards. These have to be clarifying questions only. So questions that are not clarifying, those require additional resources for the FDA to assess those, either whether it's data or specific questions that are outside of the scope of the complete response. So please make sure that your questions are limited to clarifying questions. A courtesy email to the RPM about the forthcoming CRL MR. So with these goal dates and with the RPMs having to schedule these meetings within 10 days of the meeting request receipt, it really helps if you guys can also submit that courtesy email to the RPM, because there's times when our electronic gateway has a lag or a delay. So if you submit that courtesy email to the RPM, they can quickly start triaging it and getting ready to get all of the specific review disciplines as well as other people that need to review the meeting requests ahead of time before it's actually submitted to the gateway. Now I put up this slide here, and I just want to show a snapshot of all of the meeting requests that we've received since October 1st when GDF 2 started. So what I want you to kind of focus on is basically of all of the CRL MRs that we received, about 75% have been granted either as a teleconference or written response. There's about 1% that have been canceled, and that was due to the applicants, once they submitted the meeting request, deciding to withdraw it or cancel it. The part of this graphic that I want you to really focus on is that 26% that are denied. I think we can definitely do a better job of reducing this number because I think some of the reasons for the denials are because applicants are not following the guidance and not following some of the tips and some of the meeting package, what it looks like to be complete. So these are all things I think that you all can do in terms of improving and making sure that your meetings are not denied. So I'll start going over some of the top reasons meetings are denied. So as I mentioned before, number one is non-clarifying questions. So these are questions like, does the agency agree that the alternative statistical method would be acceptable? And as I mentioned, these type of questions require additional FDA assessment of the review and would not be appropriate, and we would be denying these meeting requests. Questions outside the scope of the CRL deficiencies. So these are questions not tied specifically to the complete response letter or the specific questions that we have, or comments that we have provided in the complete response letter. They also can include requests for a major to minor reclassification, and this is not the appropriate pathway to ask that kind of question. Also, sometimes we get questions about facility issues and your plans to remediate that, or disputes on specific guidances. And these would all fall under questions that are outside the scope of the CRL MR. Request for agency review. So if we do this, will this be okay? Can the agency review our proposed protocol for a new study that we plan to conduct? So questions like these require review, and we would be denying these. And then finally, the incomplete meeting request package. So I'm not going to go through all of these examples. I think a lot of these are some of the common ones I just wanted to point out here that we've received, that we've denied. And Craig is going to kind of talk a little bit more about some of these examples as well and give a little bit more insight from an OPQ perspective. So I just wanted to kind of provide this slide to you guys so that you see some of the examples that we received. So finally, some tips I wanted to leave you with As I mentioned, email the RPM courtesy copy of the meeting request package and ensure that it is a complete meeting response package. Submit a clear agenda outlining questions during the 30-minute meeting. Prioritize the topics for discussion. I would recommend your top question should always be the first few minutes or however long that you need to have this meeting. And generally, from the experience I've had so far with some of these complete response letter meetings, I think a lot of times we cover the main things, and then there's other questions that the applicants may have, but I think it is to your advantage to make sure the top questions that you have are answered so that you can submit a response back so we don't have to go through additional review cycles. And then finally, review the FDA meeting minutes to ensure that it reflects the meeting discussion. The FDA meeting minutes are the official record. I know that some applicants submit meeting minutes from their side. While we will take that in, the official meeting records is the FDA meeting minutes. So if there's any concerns or any disagreements with that, please reach out to your RPM so that that we're all on the same page in terms of what was discussed at the meeting. So finally, I want to leave you with this graphic about post-CRL meeting requests are not a response or an amendment pre-review. They're not used for a pathway to request for reconsideration, which is a different process, or a dispute. And the post-CRL meetings should not be used as a consulting service. So these are the resources that I wanted to leave you with as well, and I kind of mentioned the GDF 2 commitment letter, as well as the guidance for industry. And then the external contacts. I think Craig is going to come up after this, but the OGD regulatory project manager is your main point of contact for these meetings. The exceptions would be for a labeling prior approval supplement, you would reach out to the labeling project manager, or for a quality prior approval supplement, you would reach out to the OPQ regulatory business process manager. Right. Thank you very much.
All right, good morning. As Jeff alluded to, I'm most certainly not Nikki Yoakum. For the start of baseball season, I got called out of the bullpen here at the last minute due to her illness. So bear with me as we go through this. I would like to note, I think one of the reasons OPQ is speaking as well as OGD on this, because a lot of this information you're here is similar, but it's because 76% of the post-CR meetings are OPQ involved. So a lot of what comes in actually involves us even more so than OGD. So how are we involved? The meeting request, as Andrew just went through, comes in, goes to OGD RPM. They reach out to the assigned RBPM, which is the regulatory business process manager. That's the OPQ project manager. And then we align with our quality assessment team who did the review. The meeting request is sent to them. We talk with them and determine what we should do with it at that point. We're given from OGD the dates when everything is due. And our responsibilities then are to review those deadlines from OGD and the goal dates and determine are they eligible to grant or deny it. Again, many of the same reasons are the same reasons OGD denies them or grants them. If we deny them, we'll provide our rationale of why. And if we're granting them, of course, we start preparing for that meeting. Then we proceed to hold if we're the project owners for supplements, for example, or attend the meeting if we're part of it and OGD is leading it. We will also be taking our own minutes and coordinate with OGD to have those minutes provided at the end. Slide just kind of breaks it down a little separately in terms of what the PM's role is and the quality assessment team, the review team does. So we're the ones to do the triage, we're the communication between them, between OGD and industry, and then we attend and help actually run the TCONR meeting, whereas of course the review staff are actually doing the scientific review portion of that. The examples of meetings are denied. Again, these should look very familiar to you. Andrew just talked about most of them. However, please pay attention because we continue to get these same types of requests over and over and over again, which is a expenditure of our resources and yours. But it's not uncommon for us to have questions pre-reviewing what you would like to submit and review and to answer your deficiency. The purpose of these is not to pre-review your answer, but make sure you understand what we're asking of you with the deficiency. There'll be specific facility remediation plans that will be included. And again, that's not our role. There'll be pointed questions about DMF or proprietary information that, of course, we cannot discuss and cannot answer. And then again, the general advice questions that Andrew talked about as well. And another one, we understand these are important to everybody, but everybody wants their well, can you please hurry up and do this? Unfortunately, given the volume of work we have and the goal dates, unless it's actually a expedited review, then it will follow the standard review times. Let's see. Another meeting request denied is separate that Andrew alluded to as well, the request for reconsideration. I believe there may be some talk about that later on today or tomorrow. And frequently has to do with facility issues. Again, that's not an appropriate post-CR discussion. If you have any questions about that, again, there'll be more talks about this later, but in addition, these are the two main guidances that should give you most of the information that you would need. So, the post-CR meeting requests are part of the commitment letter. I'm sure you guys are all very familiar with that. For the DMF, the DMF post-CR meeting request, that is also in the commitment letter. And that's separate. It's a similar concept, but it has slightly different variations to it. For example, it's 20 business days that you all have to respond requesting that meeting versus 10 for ANDAs. If you're outside of the 20 days, we will still respond, but it won't be with a meeting. It'll be an email communication back. So it'll basically be a written response at that point. You also have the option when requesting that to go ahead and just request a written response in the first place. If you just have some clarifications, don't really want the meeting, you can actually just ask for a written response. Our goal was to have those responded to within 30 days, and I believe 99% of them are being done, well ahead of that 30 days. Another difference, this goes in, the DMF goes in through the ESG request. Just in the next slide, I believe there's an email. And again, you see the bottom in lieu of the teleconference. So some post-CR tips. These are for first cycle DMFs only, right? That's what this applies to. And it should be submitted through the ESG. When in doubt, email the RBPM who issued that CR, as well as the DMF OGD mailbox here. Those are the 2 points of contact, if you will, for the post-DMF CR meeting request. There's full instructions on that DMF CR template. I won't waste your time reading through all of that, but in a nutshell, you've got 20 days. If it's after 20 days, you're gonna get an email back, and you're free to ask for emails from us in the first place. So some tips. Again, it's gonna look very familiar. Follow the criteria set forth in that post-CR guidance. If it's outside of the CR letter, if it doesn't seem to apply to it before you submit it, reach out to the RBPM who issued the letter and ask them, is this the right thing? How should I go about submitting this? Every situation is going to be different, and we can help you determine that. Now if it is truly a clarification of the CR, at that point, go through the post-CR meeting request process, as opposed to reaching out to the PMs, which is because we're going to want to track these as part of GDF performance and follow the same process. If we get to the point where okay, yes, your meeting's granted, we're going to have it, make sure you have the right people on the call, right? If you need a technical person on that call to have that discussion, make sure we can arrange it that your technical person as well as ours is available. It does us no good to say, you know what, that's great, we'll have to all get back to you, or vice versa. So do your best to have the right people on the call. And that goes well beyond just these post-CR, right? That's any meeting you have with us. That's a really good practice to get into. There's going to be an agenda ahead of time. Please stick to that agenda. You know, we can't go off on tangents. The meeting times are limited, I believe, to 30 minutes. So we can't deviate real far away. If your meeting, if you requested 10 questions and 5 fit the criteria and 5 didn't, we will only address those 5 that did. 5 that didn't, we will kindly punt them. Afterwards, you'll get an official meeting minutes from the FDA. That's your copy. That's to make sure we were clear with what we said, make sure you heard what we said. Part of the end of that meeting, it's always a very good idea to clarify, right? Go back through what we talked about, make sure before we hang up that phone that everybody understands what everybody's saying. In your CR response, again, and this goes for any kind of other response, if you have communications with FDA about anything, and you respond, and if you reference said communication, said meeting, it's always helpful for us then to go back and say, oh, okay, we see they talked with so-and-so about whatever, and then we have that background that makes that whole process easier. So points of contact. For the post-CR meetings, for the ANDAs, it's straight to the OGDPM. Unless, of course, it's a quality-only prior approval supplement. Then the OPQ, our BPM, we are the project owners, therefore it goes to us. If it's a labeling only prior approval, you go to the labeling PM. And again, you'll know those because they will be the people who sent you the letter. The IRDRL, same concept, is going to be to that discipline PM or RBPM. At the end of the day, it's who mailed you the letter. And then for the post-CR meetings for DMFs, again, the RBPM who issued the letter, as well as the DMF OGD mailbox. And then if you have a question for OPQ that's outside of the CR letter, including post-marketing stuff for the supplements or any of that information, you can always send emails to the CDER OPQ inquiries box. And we have a group in our office that that monitors that box and will farm it out to the appropriate people to get you your answer. So when and all else fails, that's a good reference to go to. Resources, again, same ones you saw that Andrew had, the GDF 2 commitment, the guidance for the post-CR meetings, and then the bottom 2 are the amendments guidance and the reconsideration. Those are the ones that are used for the amendments guidance, the quote-unquote major minor deficiency with Appendix A, and then the reconsideration. With that, that's all of our slides. I believe we're open for questions.
All right. We'll play our game again just as we did last time. For the 1,500, 1,600 so people online, if you didn't already type your questions in, please use that Q&A pod in the lower right-hand corner to get those submitted. For those of you here in the room, excellent, you're way ahead of me. The 2 microphones are ready to go. Let's go ahead and start with microphone number 1, please. Nice and close for me.
I just want a little clarification because it seemed like there was a couple of different answers. If I got a CRL and plenty of time has gone by, and now all of a sudden management, because they always make the right decision the first time, now management wants to have a meeting request. It sounded like to me that you said, well, maybe we would do it, but you would only get responses, or maybe we wouldn't deny it outright, but we wouldn't be under the GDUFA timelines. Can you just clarify that for me?
Can you clarify which meeting you're talking about? I'm not sure if you're talking about the MRCM one or the post-complete response letter meeting request. Which one are you talking about?
Post-complete response letter.
Okay, and your question was?
If it's been longer than the 10 days.
Right.
It's been maybe like 3 months.
Okay.
Even longer. Can we still request clarification questions? Or is it too late? Or can we just, if we submit a meeting request, would you only give us back written responses? Or if we submit a meeting request, would you grant it but not adhere to the GDUFA timelines?
Right, so I think your question was if it's, say, past the 10 days, right? And if we would still conduct these meetings if you had clarifying questions. So I think I mentioned if it's past the 10 days, you wouldn't get a specific GDUFA goal date in terms of that we would schedule these meetings and contact you within the 10 days and that 30-day time frame of actually holding the meeting. But as long as it meets the criteria that we have in terms of it's a complete meeting package and you're asking that clarifying question, the RPM would contact you and they would provide either, you know, a written response or we can hold that teleconference.
Thank you.
Yep.
And just to add to that, for the DMF piece, that was where it becomes a written request. If it's outside of the 20-day, a written response rather, if it's past the 20 days for a DMF CR meeting request, then you will get the written response.
All right, let's take our first online question if we could, please.
So one of our questions is, can an applicant ask questions to the FDA during a mid-review cycle meeting related to the open DRL deficiencies?
Can you please
Yeah,
repeat
could
that?
we repeat that a
Yeah.
little bit louder for me,
Little
Lisa?
louder, sorry.
Nice and- yep.
Can an applicant ask questions to the FDA during the mid-cycle review meeting related to the open DRL's deficiencies?
So I think your question was, during an MRCM meeting, can the applicant ask questions when there's an open DRL? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay. So if there is an open DRL, typically the MRCM would not be granted yet. The RPM would not schedule an MRCM meeting. It's generally granted after all of the DRLs or IRs are already issued. So that wouldn't be happening.
Okay, and if there's any more questions in the room, please come on up to the microphones and right on cue there. You go hold down a little bit, nice and close for me, please.
This is a question regard.
Oh, sorry. Over here. Yep. Go ahead, ma'am. Go ahead. Yes, please.
This is a question regarding an RPM assigned to an ANDA. When there's a change in the RPM, how is that communicated to the applicant?
So if there's a change in the RPM, whether the RPM has left or say, you know, they're out for extended leave, then the RPM who's replacing that ANDA should be introducing themselves, whether it's through, you know, an email or specific correspondence. If you haven't heard back, and I'm not sure if this was already covered, but we have a division of project management structure where if you even just Google DPM org structure, it shows all of the RPMs, and this is public information, as well as the supervisors and everyone else located. So I think worst case scenario, you could always contact one of the supervisors to find out what happened, but generally the new RPM should be contacting you. So you should always be aware of whoever it is if, you know, they've been replaced.
Okay. So in case where there's silence, we wouldn't be crossing the line by going one level higher and asking our question.
No, I think if you don't hear anything back and you haven't heard from anybody, I think it's appropriate to contact somebody to make sure that, you know, that ANDA has been assigned, but that should not really be happening.
Thank you.
Okay, and that was sneaking in a second question. So, oh, you've got nobody sitting next to you. That's why you did it. All right. Microphone number 1, if you could, nice and close for me, please.
Yes, Andrew, this is about the MRCMs. You had a tip slide, and I think the first bullet said clearly identify eligibility on cover letter. That referred to when you originally first submit your ANDA, you should kind of write that in the cover letter. Is that what that was referring to?
Yes, that was what I meant.
Thanks.
Okay, let's go to our next online question, if we could, please.
If the DRL response is submitted before scheduling the mid-cycle review meeting, will the agency hold the meeting after the DRL response? If yes, how do we address some of the meeting points after the DRL response?
So the question was, if the DRL, I'm sorry, can you repeat that question again?
Sure. If the DRL response is submitted before scheduling the mid-cycle review meeting, will the agency hold the meeting after the DRL response? If yes, how do we address the question, some of the meeting points after the DRL response?
Okay, so if the DRL response has already come in and the MRCM maybe the RPM has already contacted you and scheduled it, at the point where I explained about the agenda being sent, at that point, if there's something specific that you wanted to discuss, I think that would be an appropriate time to contact the RPM and possibly add that to the agenda before the actual MRCM is held.
Okay. And again, if there's any more questions in the room, come on up to the mic. Next online question, please.
Okay, if a meeting request is denied based on a deficiency such as an EL study, impurity, elemental impurities, etc. in CRL, what is the short way to get clarification on these questions from the agency if the meeting request is denied for those reasons?
So for any of the time the meeting request is denied, you can always reach out to the RBPM. In that case, that would be a quality issue, the ones you listed. If you reach out to the RBPM, we can work with you to get you those answers, depending on the situation.
Okay, microphone number 1, nice and close for me, please.
Yes. It was stated that the RPM creates the agenda, but then again in another slide it said, what can industry do to assist? And it said, create the agenda. So I just wanted to clarify who creates the agenda for the CRL MR.
So for the MRCM, I think you're correct in the first statement in terms of this is an FDA-initiated process. So FDA would be creating the agenda. But at that point, when the agenda is sent, the applicant has an opportunity at that point to kind of work with the RPM to possibly add something to the agenda or get clarification or comments on the agenda.
Okay, next online question, please.
If the applicant,
Go ahead.
sorry. If the applicant requests a post-complete response meeting, will the goal date for providing the response remain the same, or will it change based on the meeting outcome?
So sorry, I missed the last part of it. You said, will the goal date change, and what was the last
Will the
piece?
goal date change for providing the response remain the same, or will it change based on the meeting outcome?
No, that would not change based on the meeting outcome. It would stay the same in terms of the metrics that we hold in terms of what we provide in terms of the response.
Okay, we have microphone number 2, please.
Do we have
Nice.
do we have an opportunity to clarify a question raised under a DRL?
So is your question asking for clarification on a DRL? I can't speak for specifically for OPQ, but generally, I think if there's a clarifying question on the DRL, you could always reach out to the point of contact on the DRL that was issued, and based on the question, we'll work with you to make sure that it's something that we can clarify.
Is there a specific timeline within which we should be reaching out?
I can't specifically comment on the DRL process because that's outside the scope of what I'm covering today, but I think the best advice I would give you is to whoever issued that DRL, there's always a point of contact to reach out to them in terms of what the best timing is.
I mean, speaking from an OPQ perspective, yeah, we would encourage you to reach out and ask any clarifying questions. Again, we're not going to pre-review it. We're not going to do any of that other stuff, but we would rather you know what we're asking, submit a complete answer the first time instead of you seeing that deficiency again in a CR if it was strictly due to you not exactly understanding what was going to be asked, or what we were asking, I should say.
Next online question, please.
Yeah, first, we received a request. If you could please repeat the questions in the room as you get them, because people are having trouble hearing them online. The next question is a question on the CRL MR meeting. If the allocated 30 minutes is not sufficient to answer all the agenda clarification questions, will the FDA provide written responses?
I can only speak of the experiences I've had, but so the question was, if we run out of time in the 30 minutes and there's additional clarifying questions, will we provide that in a written response?
Yes.
The answer is generally no. Do you know, Greg, if you've seen any?
I can't say that I've seen that situation come up, truthfully. I think it's probably unlikely that you would have that many clarifying questions that are truly clarifying and meeting the scope of that meeting. Yeah, I'm going to go with Andrew. I apologize, I'm not certain what we would do. But, if you think of it from the DMF side, we would send you a written response via email. So I think reasonably, we would not want to leave you without an answer, so we would probably arrange to get you those answers, whether it was another meeting or written.
Okay, we've got about 2 more minutes for Q&A, so if there's any questions in the room, step up to the mic, but let's take our next online question, please.
From the industry, do we request the MRC, and when can we request the MRC? Will the FDA initiate the MRCM for every single ANDA submitted?
So the question was, can industry initiate the MRCM? And the answer to that is FDA will always be initiating these MRCMs. So the applicant should not be really initiating it. The only thing I would mention to that is if you are a complex drug product and you have been granted a product development or pre-submission meeting and you haven't heard from us, generally within 14 days of your ANDA being accepted, then that's an appropriate time to contact RPM and we can initiate that MRCM. But the applicants would not be initiating it and creating the agenda and requesting the meeting.
Okay, and we've got time for one more online question, please.
Okay. Are mid-cycle meetings granted for competitive generic products or priority review ANDAs?
So the question was, are ANDAs that are designated as CGT or competitive generic therapy products also granted an MRCM? And the answer to that is yes, if they meet the qualifications of being a complex drug product, and as I said, if they've been granted a product development or a pre-submission meeting, then that would be appropriate and FDA would initiate an MRCM meeting for them.
Okay, and with that, please help me